after all this discussion, what is Agile? Agile is nothing more than this, folks. It's how to manage uncertainty using this Agile mindset we talked about, right? This growth mindset in the software domain. That's where it was started. So when we look at the manifesto, you guys have seen the manifesto before? Agile manifesto? Okay, so we'll talk about this. But basically the manifesto is how Agile was started, right? It's the document that started Agile. And it says the following. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We'll talk about it in detail, don't worry. Right? But I want you to look at these items and say, all it is it provides more learning and discovery. Right? Individuals and interactives provide more learning and discovery, right? And manage uncertainty than processes and tools. Right? Working software the same. We'll talk about the manifesto in a bit. Okay? So Agile is a mindset. This mindset is all about what we talked about: welcoming change, failing early, right? Learning and discovery, continuous delivery, continuous feedback, all that. This mindset, mind you, I believe is applicable beyond software. It's applicable to all forms of knowledge work that have uncertainty, from my point of view. Finance. What does Agile look like in finance? I don't know. But this is a frontier for me. In marketing, right? In operation, all forms of knowledge work. Now, in the software world, this mindset is established through 4 values. Grounded by 12 principles, and then manifested through an unlimited number of practices. Have you heard of the term Scrum? Scrum, my friends, is nothing more than a methodology. It's a process. It's a bunch of these practices bundled together in an efficient way, right? That would be in line with the mindset, values, and principles. However, it is a bunch of practices. Extreme programming is a bunch of practices. Your own Agile process should be a bunch of old practices that are in line with the mindset, values, and principles. I'm sure you have some, right? New practices and unique practices that are only yours. That's where you really have broken out of shuhari. You've created your own path. But Agile is here, the mindset, values, and principles, not just the practices. And unfortunately, 95% of people understand Agile as process. And when they understand Agile as a process, they end up doing it.
With a fixed mindset.
Well, fixed mindset, shoe-level implementation, it's a mess. It is a mess, right? And they learn the practice. Here's the thing. I go to so many people and they come back to ask me, tell me what I need to do to be Agile. Right? Give me a checklist. I'm like, you just didn't understand anything. You didn't get it. Right? Because we're so industrial age mindset oriented, task list, linear mindset, right? Just give me something. Now, I still need to start you at shoe. I granted, right? But it's not about doing, it's about being. Because you understand it as a culture and a mindset. And so this is why I've spent, and I will spend, the whole first day talking about this. Because then tomorrow when we talk about the practices, you won't dogmatically implement them. You'll understand them as shoe-level instructions and guidance, right? And then be able to move to ha and read. And this, for me, is the difference between education and training, right? I can train a monkey, but I educate a human. Think about this. I have gone through 4 years of college to learn how to program, computer science. I can send someone tomorrow to a 1-week training and they will learn how to program. What's the difference? One is educated, the other is trained. And by the way, both of them, day 1 of the job, will perform the same. But one can break the shoe level and move to ha and read, the educated. The other will stay in shoe. That's the difference. Clear? That's the big difference. And if we talk about the training versus education, here's a typical 2-week iteration for Agile, right? Typical 2 weeks. Here are some of the common Agile practices out there. Iteration planning, daily stand-ups, release planning, demos, retrospectives, all this, right? Look at the amount of white space out there. So much, right? This is the being of Agile. It's what you're doing when you're not doing the practice. It's how you think, how you engage, how you behave, how you think about work. It's all that. And this comes from education. This comes from these kind of discussions. Not from, all right, folks, we're going to start talking about Agile. First step, create a backlog. Right? I'm just doing it, right? I'm telling you how to mechanically go through the steps, not the why behind it. Is that making sense? And this idea of educating the mindset, we need to do not just for developers or testers, for leadership, for business people, for project managers, right? It has to be all across. To end, let's talk about the history of Agile for a second. Okay? Let's talk about it for a couple of minutes and then we'll break for lunch. So, when we look about the history of Agile, and I don't know if you guys can see this, but it's quite clear in your notes, I hope. It starts really from the 1960s and 1950s, right? I mean, here's a quote by Jerry Weinberg saying, "We were doing incremental development as early as 1957. 1957, right? He says, under the direction of Bernie, whatever, right? Now, he says this guy Bernie was a colleague of John von Neumann. Does anyone know who John von Neumann is? He's what? Sort of the father of computer science, right? Father of algorithms and computer science. So perhaps he learned it there or assumed it was totally natural. How else would you work? I do remember Herb Jacobs developing a large simulation for Motorola where the technique used was, as far as I can tell, indistinguishable from Extreme Program, which came out in 1999. We move along through history here, right? End of 1970s, early 80s, the evolutionary way of developing software came out, and then in the 1980s, a couple of key elements happened, right? Number one, let's go back to the 70s first. Very, very important article came out called The Waterfall. Dr. Winston Royce in 1970 wrote this article. Do you guys see this picture, right? This is the famous waterfall. Can you guys read this sentence right here? Well, here it is. He says, and I quote, "I believe in this concept, but the implementation described above is risky and invites failure." The guy that wrote the article said, do not do this, but instead do this. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the waterfall, not this. He actually said, don't do this. But this is why, by the way, I've started calling the waterfall the beautiful waterfall. You know why? Because it's so mesmerizing. Look at it. I mean, it's so linear. Right? It's beautiful. Who wouldn't want to be on a project like this? I mean, I even tell Agile, it's like, dude, come on. Wouldn't you want to be on a project where the customer knows what they want? They just tell it to you straight up. They don't change their mind. You design it and it works. You deploy it and they love it. Who wouldn't want to be on a project like that? It's mesmerizing. But the reality is, it's a facade. And even in 1970, and listen carefully to me, when programming was more task work than knowledge work. 1970, there's punch cards. These are tangible items. You had to wait to get time at a terminal. You better get it right the first time. This is 1970, and he's still saying, do it twice if possible. This is his 5 advice points at the end. One of them is do it twice. One time to learn from it, and one time to do it. Not plan it, do it. because you'll learn from writing it, from the experience of it. And then he says, number 5, involve the customer. Such a foreign concept. Because people today implement waterfall and say, here's my requirements, see you in 6 months. But what you're not gonna, no, I'm doing waterfall here. I'm not doing that agile crap you guys are doing. Alright? So I'm doing waterfall here and I like it. But the waterfall guy said involve the customer. So what the hell are you doing? Well, I'm just doing whatever I want to call it right now because I just don't want to deal with you. Well, if you have an engagement or a customer that just says, here's what I want, I'll see you in 6 months, you're screwed. Agile or not. Regardless of the process, it's doomed. So we move along in history here, right? The spiral model comes up in 1985. Spiral model basically says risk-driven, right? Why risk-driven? Because the things that are riskiest need the most learning and discovery up front. We move along in 1986, a key article comes out called the New Product Development Game. The New Product Development Game talks about knowledge work, right? So it talks about knowledge work and says, the famous quote in it says, the relay race approach to product development, which is the linear way, right, the assembly line way, right? The relay race approach to product development may conflict with the goals of maximum speed and flexibility, agility. Instead, a rugby approach, they said that, right? A rugby approach, where the team goes together as a team, goes the distance together as a team, may better serve today's competitive requirements, 1986. And from that article, Scrum was born. Scrum came from the word scrummage, right? Which was symbolic of the rugby approach. Before that, 1986, also, a famous book, right, by Fred Brooks came out, a famous article, called No Silver Bullet. No Silver Bullet. In it, he says the following. Much of present-day software acquisition procedures rest upon the assumption that one can specify a satisfactory system in advance, right, give me the requirements, get bids for its construction, right, procure and plan, right, have it built and install it. Very linear. I think this assumption is fundamentally wrong and that many software acquisition problems spring from this fallacy. Guys, these are the 80s. This is not revolutionary. These are the 80s. And then in the 90s, Scrum was born. You guys remember Rapid Application Development, RAD and JAD sessions and all that? It was formalized into something called DSDM in 1994, right? You have the Rational Unified Process, Extreme Programming, FDD, Crystal. All of these are methodologies that started popping up in the 90s. And what happened in February of 2001 was all these people came together and said, we are doing something different, right? And they wrote the Agile Manifesto, which really coined the term, finally. It gave all this thought process a term to refer to called Agile.